Hey, welcome back to Invisible Machines, a podcast produced in partnership with UX Magazine and OneReach AI. If you have been listening to this podcast all season long, you have no doubt heard Rob and I talking about LLMs and cupcakes in the same sentence. For a full explanation of how those two things fit together, I will direct you to episode 2, which is a great conversation with Jonathan Frankel, the chief scientist over at Mosaic ML, who talked about kind of if you're building a custom LLM, you might not want to make just one giant LLM. You might want to, or one cupcake, let's say. You might want to bake 1,000 cupcakes that have, different ratios of data sets so that you can get the one that is optimized for your use case, for what you need. And it was a fascinating conversation, and obviously we've talked about it a lot, but it came up again as Rob and I were kind of discussing how to regulate something as sort of unpredictable and now suddenly ubiquitous as generative AI. And we had the thought that, a nutritional label, the kind that you find on packaged goods in the grocery store, could actually be a great place to start, because you look at one of those and you decide if this is something you want to put in your body. If you're going to interact with an LLM and potentially put a bunch of information in your head, you might want to have sort of a similar rubric. So, a nutritional label for an LLM that could tell you how much Wikipedia is in there, how much Reddit is in there, how much proprietary company data has been sprinkled in, who built this LLM, who trained it. All that kind of information could be presented in a pretty concise way that might answer a lot of questions and could be leveraged to try and move this kind of technology forward more responsibly. We were super excited to talk to someone about this concept, and so we were really excited when we connected with Mike Lee, who is the founder of the Future Market. He does a lot of consulting in the food space, and the Future Market is also a fascinating Substack where he explores food and technology. It's a really interesting blog, actually, because he does write primarily about food, but his writing about technology is quite astute and in-depth, and really this food blog has become sort of one of my favorite tech blogs, too. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Quick hat tip, too, to my longtime friend and colleague, Mark Brush, who is a Forbes kingmaker in the natural product space. He was the first person I turned to when Rob and I realized we really wanted to talk to someone who understood nutritional labels. And he connected us with Mike Lee, who not only understands nutritional labels, but he had actually had this idea of putting a nutritional label on an LLM, I think months before Rob and I did. And he actually did a pretty amazing mock-up of what that might look like. And you can find that in an article on his Future Market Substack. I definitely recommend you checking that out. Quick hat tip also to everyone who listens to this podcast and who subscribes to this podcast, either on, your favorite podcast provider, or if you like watching this podcast on YouTube, definitely subscribe there. We love when people leave comments. A lot of the comments that listeners and viewers have left for us have really been informative and helped us guide future episodes of this podcast. It's always kind of a work in progress. Like a conversation, it's kind of always bubbling and changing and ongoing. Today's conversation is a great one. Mike Lee is going to blow your mind a bit, I think. So let's get into that conversation right now. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on Invisible Machines.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Rob, the pleasure is always seeing you.
Where are we? What is this?
So Mike, we had a good conversation last week, and we kind of talked a lot about how certain processes and regulations and systems in food regulation, might be useful as we try and kind of wrap our arms around AI as well. And I do want to get into some of that stuff, but I also on your blog today, I was reading a really great article, your blog, The Future Market, about how slow food for AI, and how the concept of slow food could actually be incredibly instructive as we're kind of in the stages of dealing with generative AI in particular. So I thought maybe if you could kind of give a quick introduction to slow food and talk a bit about that might be a really cool place to start.
Yeah. Well, so slow food's a movement that originated some years ago. I don't remember, but it's been around for decades, a while, in Italy. And it's in a nutshell, it stands for a lot of things, but in a nutshell, it really just stands for being the antithesis to fast food. Highly processed, cheap calories, stuff like that. Really emphasizing place and provenance and process of food. It's just kind of these old school values that I think in the world that we live in with faster and faster everything, especially food, it's just become a really salient kind of antidote to that, right? And so I think similarly, AI is moving extremely, extremely fast, right? And I don't think that I don't necessarily agree with kind of the calls for like moratoriums, not because I don't think they're useful. I just think they're absolutely completely impossible to enforce and happen. Arguably counterproductive too, but I do think we just do need to be more thoughtful about what are the motives of everything, what are things coming from, where are you getting kind of stuff to create these things, and also like slowness in terms of figuring out the right economic models, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people talk about the alignment problem in AI, which is misalignment between machine and man. But honestly, I think that until we get to AGI, I don't think it's as big of an issue as we think. I think the bigger issue pre-AGI is misalignment between humans, between corporations and users, between corporations and other corporations, between people and the law, right? I mean, depending on how kind of OpenAI and Meta decide to monetize their AI models, I think is going to have a reverberating effect to how those things are designed. I mean, we already saw this with social media where the business model was monetizing people's eyeballs, and that one kind of big incentive leads to a huge domino effect of basically creating systems that are all engineered around optimizing that one thing as eyeballs. And then that's where you get, the algorithm the way it is, amplifying, echo chambers and misinformation because it gets eyeballs, because we optimized only for that. So I think slow food is not a silver bullet, but I think it just forces you to kind of really just not race to get the easy money, right? And really be thoughtful about the downstream impacts of saying, we're going to do an ad model for AI,
Right.
Okay, well, what does that actually mean, right? Don't just shoot from the hip and do it because your investors are asking you to do it. Try to kind of force yourself to think deeper into the process. So,
yeah, it feels like, to me, you kind of walked it down this logical tree. The beginning of the tree is this a unintended emergent complexity sort of event, negative event that was like all the right intentions, bad outcome? Or was this, bad intentions from the beginning? You really do have to branch at that point to say, like, it's going to be two remedies, right? One remedy is probably not going to serve both of those scenarios. So you walk down the remedy of bad actors doing things on purpose, and you probably could say, we have a lot of things in place already for that. Sure, we could add more. We can always add more, and that's true for guns. That's true for technology. That's true for food, GMO, blah, 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 right?
yeah.
Like there's, that is true for any technology, including pesticides and blah, blah, blah. So then you go down the road of, okay, does this technology have a greater possibility of negative, unintended consequences than other technologies in the past? And I think that's arguable to say, genetic modification of our food versus AI. I'm not sure, stem cell research, I'm not sure that you could argue that AI has greater danger than those. But let's just say that it's in that same category, and as such, we need to do something. And then you have this other perspective, which is, in order to learn and innovate, you have to break things. You have to move fast and break things. And we all acknowledge this. Slowing down, like as a country, and saying, okay, we're going to slow down the rate in which, we learn, essentially, would also basically say we're going to learn on somebody else experimenting. In other words, we know everybody's not going to slow down. So what we're basically saying is we're going to let someone else break things. and then we're going to learn from their mistakes. And then we can all say, is that good or bad? Because are we walking away from the opportunity to innovate?
Yeah.
And say, that's too dangerous, and the risk reward is that we'd rather somebody else, innovate and us follow, which you could kind of say, like, that's what everybody else has done with the United States. So if we decide to do that, it'll be unprecedented, right? Because we're always the ones who tend to lead in innovation as a country.
Yeah.
So this would be a new muscle for the U.S. to sit back and not lead innovation.
But I think that's where maybe the metaphor breaks down when you jump from food to technology. I don't think that maybe the speed element, even though it's in the name slow food, which makes a lot of sense for food. I mean, that name was created as a creative antithesis to fast food, right? Denoting the speed. I think when you're talking about tech, it's not necessarily the speed of like the thing that we should be worried about. It's more just the mindfulness. Part of the slow food movement is not just kind of slowing down how you're cooking and eating. It's being more thoughtful and mindful.
Right,
about
exactly.
The kinds of
like
foods you're eating.
It's not slowing the speed in which we learn. It's just, in fact, you could say it's increasing, right? The speed in which we learn, because we're thinking more.
Yeah. I think it'd be great if you had kind of an entity that was being really thoughtful and deliberate about their choices and careful in AI, but are moving at like an extremely fast speed to do that, because then you're just going to get more reps about being thoughtful. The problem is if you're moving fast and not being reckless, then you're just,
so it's really about moving fast at scale versus moving fast. That's like the fear. Like, it's not the speed in which you're innovating, it's the speed in which you're deploying it at mass. And maybe that's important to distinction, right?
I've been thinking about also too the mass thing for a while, right? Because rewind like 2 minutes ago when I talked about the social media thing. Social media has network effects, right? So it didn't make sense for everyone to create their own Facebook. It made more sense for everyone to go onto the one Facebook.
Right.
So that obviously accumulates power for Meta, for Facebook. I don't know how important, to be honest, on a practical everyday use case level, like OpenAI might be in 10, 20 years, because there's not really a network effect at play into ChatGPT, right? The open source local model that I have on my gaming PC is just as useful, even though I'm the only person using it, right? And in fact, I think that's going to be more of a defining feature of the AI world, the generative AI world in the future. It's not who's going to win, OpenAI versus Llama versus whoever. It's going to be everyone's going to have our own,
Yeah. And you could almost imagine the opposite, that you having your own or having the next best thing is a way to differentiate yourself versus like an advantage to us all using the same one. There's probably an advantage to staying with the next best thing, trying different things, getting different results. Because if everyone uses the same one, we all, how do we compete? We're all going to get the same answer, right?
It's like music and the rise of the MP3, right? Is the MP3 sound as good as the lossless master tape of the Taylor Swift album? No. Does that matter? No. Not everyone needs the fully lossless kind of version of the album. The MP3 was good enough. Does everybody need the latest GPT-7 or whatever it is? Probably not. The GPT-4, that's going to be on everyone's machine on their own is probably enough.
Yeah.
It's interesting you brought up mindfulness because, most companies aren't particularly known for being mindful, I guess, with maybe the exception of like Patagonia being like a thoroughly mindful company. Because in the article too, you bring up this idea that, it was a lot of like startup food companies that kind of disrupted big food and made them, in essence, that you could say, become more mindful of some of their practices. And we now kind of have that correlation with people being able to create their own LLMs and generative AI tools and kind of in some way dictate the trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen way faster. I think I always kind of compare food. I primarily almost exclusively work in food, but I used to work in tech for a brief stint. So I'm always kind of looking at the patterns of change between the two. And food, I always think, is a slow motion version of all the other stuff that's innovating in tech. I mean, we had Netflix and the idea of the infinite kind of library of stuff you can access well before we had online food shopping, which is sort of the same thing. It's just the idea that you're not relegated to the four walls of your local grocery store to get food. You can now go on wherever and order anything you want. That happened in a way slower method than something like movies or music did, because movies and music can be easily transportable related to food. So I think there's always parallels between tech and food. Just food slower.
Yeah, I mean, because the idea that nutrition, it's one thing to experience food, and that's great, but there's always the side effect of your health, and
I think the same holds true of tech, though, right? Like you kind of ingest it, you get that dopamine hit, and then you're left to deal with the consequences.
Yeah. I guess so. Like social media, maybe more specifically.
TikTok is just eating the Doritos one by one, right? And we're starting to see what is the effects of growing up eating digital Doritos your whole childhood. What does that turn you into?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I can go back. My mom was one of those early hippie health food, when health food stores weren't everywhere, and my friends, were like, "Wow, you eat this weird food at home."
Right.
And I can say that it was almost a stigma to eat health food. It was weird. I was embarrassed oftentimes as a young child, when I opened up my lunchbox and everybody opened up theirs and had white bread, Skippy peanut butter, and jelly, and mine was brown bread, bananas, and crunchy peanut butter that my mom made ground at home. And I would
turn.
I know, I would hide my lunchbox, I'd be oh man, I'd just kind of hide in the corner and eat my lunch because I was so embarrassed, which is crazy. The tables have turned, she was right, and all of that stuff, and I tell her that all the time.
I was the same thing with Chinese food. I was always given the weird Chinese food thing, and all I wanted was peanut butter and jelly, and now jokes on all of you, because you're all waiting in line in Resi trying to get into the latest whatever Asian fusion place.
That's right. Yeah, and maybe that's kind of where we are with social media. We talk about the need for socializing, and maybe we're embarrassed to say we don't get enough, or that we're lonely, or that there's a stigma around it, which prevents the conversation of what is a good diet of socializing look like? What is a balanced, organic portion versus a junk food Dorito portion of socialization.
Yeah.
Because then we can have that conversation, as long as we're not embarrassed to say that, that we're not getting what we need. And that there's good calories and bad calories. Then we can, once we're all aware, then we can, like you said, it can go mainstream, the discussion about empty calories in socializing.
Well, and I think this connects back to that slow food analogy, right? Part of the slow food movement is just kind of, slow food doesn't explicitly say don't eat dessert, don't eat junk food.
Right.
It's just, if you're going to kind of be purposeful about it and, make sure you have balance,
Right.
I think you can totally be, and I think that's the same with kind of just anything digital. I think the problem is when you get stuck in kind of an addictive click hole and you didn't want to be there, and you're not sure why you're doing it, and it's just your dopamine is just taking over, and you're just kind of turning into a zombie doing it, versus I'm going to sit down for 45 minutes and just scroll through TikTok because I've had a really long week,
Right.
I think there's a huge difference between those two kind of behaviors, and I think that's the same analogy for, it's okay to eat a bag of Doritos every now and then, but it's a problem if you're just compulsively addicted to them and you eat them all the time, that's a very different situation.
Right. Or you're eating them instead of
a real food. Yeah,
a real food.
Exactly.
And
I've heard that nutritional advice too. Like you shouldn't eat something that your grandmother or grandfather wouldn't recognize as food. Like if they saw it and were like, what am I supposed to do with this? But that model kind of falls apart with the speed we're talking about because, my grandmother barely recognized technology at the end of her life. So.
Yeah. I know that I understand the sentiment behind those pieces of advice, but like they make me real because I'm just like, it's not a good way to judge your nutritional advice,
No,
the other one,
because you might be smoking a cigarette while you're like eating that.
Frying bacon, yeah.
Yeah, they also, like my grandmother's generation also smoked cigarettes on airplanes, so it's like, the other one, I made a big, I brought this up in one of my other pieces, but the other one that I hate is don't only eat food where the ingredients are things you can pronounce. Which I'm like, okay, so does that mean arsenic is safer than xanthan gum?
Exactly.
It's a totally ridiculous thing to do. It's like, dihydrogen monoxide can kill you. It can cause corrosion. It can do all this stuff. Well, what's dihydrogen monoxide? It's freaking water. Like, so I can't stand the food charlatans that kind of say like, oh, eat only ingredients you can pronounce, because it's like, that is not like your level of literacy should not be an indicator of a food's safety or healthfulness.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's also those elements of food too, where like an optimal diet is different for each person.
Totally.
So then again, I guess technology intersects because it feels like truly preventative kind of medicine starts with maybe a hyper optimized diet that is full of like foods that are nutritionally balanced specifically for your ecosystem, I guess.
And I think like, AI potentially has the ability to be more of an echo chamber reinforcer for individuals because, before we had to just kind of like abide by whatever echo chamber the Mark Zuckerberg, algorithm created. Now you've got your individual, like you could have your own little like sycophant, like assistant saying like, hey, I had this idea about this thing. What do you think about that? And then like you could trade it to potentially just be like, oh yeah, just be your hype man, and just like, oh yeah, that's you're right. That's really interesting. I think this you're right. The earth is flat, like, and here's all this like DS evidence. Like, so I don't know. It's like that sort of like thing is we all can kind of eventually very soon create our own little pet hype man in the form of an LLM that we've customized on ourselves, right? And say, I'm going to feed you a diet of only the ideas that I like. And then people just, so that to me is the other edge of the sword with things like this.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, I often think about this, that AI is maybe a red herring, and that what we're talking about is these centralized algorithms of decision making and the emergent complexity and unintended consequences that come from centralization of overly simplistic algorithms, and that large companies and enterprises are really just made up of a bunch of algorithms that tend to work at scale, and that you could break down a McDonald's into a series of algorithms, and you realize that what's impressive about it at scale is that those algorithms are run pretty flawlessly across each McDonald's and each factory that makes buns, and and like all the way back to the source, to the whole sourcing the original ingredients, and you're like, all these algorithms are just replicated. And that what makes them so successful is the degree in which the same algorithm works globally, no matter where you are. And that's what allows them to scale. And that centralized algorithm is what makes them successful. And that other companies that have tried to create algorithms at scale, it turns out, need more customization. And are subject to to more environmental or specific circumstantial situations that cause them not to work, right? You have to adapt them for
Yeah.
each location, and therefore they don't work. So they discovered, wow, I found an algorithm that works globally. That's great. That's what makes a good business. But maybe AI, to your point, is like a new world in which those algorithms can't compete with ones that are flexible and can adapt to each environment. So now we end up with, let's call it slow food, fast food, whatever,
Yeah.
locations that have algorithms that don't operate exactly the same, that can adapt. And so we have a new kind of enterprise emerging where the old one that's like basic algorithms that work more broadly can't compete with ones that can adapt. And you think of like humans, right? What makes humans as an organism so impressive? It's our adaptation capabilities, not the fact that, we were just created to perfectly fit into, this environment.
Yep.
But it's more that we're so adaptive. And so if that's the formula for success, then AI might make all these enterprise companies and their basic algorithms sort of, something we look back at as like, oh my God, we didn't know what we were doing back then.
Yeah, and I think there's an analogy that's been happening in the food industry for the last 20 years that I think overlaps really nicely with where we are right now in tech, which is, I do a lot of talks around the future of food, and everybody always tries to ask me like, oh, what's the big thing we're going to be eating next? Like they want me to say like, oh, kale's hot next year, and then everyone's going to buy kale, right? And I think like that increasingly is impossible to triangulate because we're living in this world where it's the end of one size fits all food. If you were a vegan in the middle of nowhere in the 1950s, you were probably the only person you knew who was a vegan. Now you could be anywhere in the world and a vegan, and you connect with thousands of other vegans and find like-minded people, and you can raise your hand to corporations and say, hey, look at all of us vegans, like make products for us, right? And so, combine that with the barriers to entry to starting a food company are still relatively high, but they're lower than they ever have been, right? And there's so much infrastructure for a food startup founder to say, I have an idea for a cookie company to get going and get in market, that you no longer have to just accept Chips Ahoy as the only cookie that's out there. You can make your own and put that out there. And so it makes it impossible to predict what the next macro food trend is, because I don't think there is any. I think it's just going to be more niche kind of things because everyone can get exactly what they need.
Right.
And I think as an eater, that's great. You look at AI, and I think right now we're all kind of, sucking from the teat of OpenAI and their humongous model. But as model, it gets, compute gets easier to procure for an individual. And as these models become more and more prolific and open source, you don't have to settle for the big monoculture model anymore. You can kind of create your own, and now everyone is eventually going to have access to their own compute. And so, I just see it's just, this is kind of the next huge enabler for the internet of giving individuals the power. I mean, social media and blogs and stuff like that, that gave every individual the power to communicate and publish, where only the New York Times was able to do it before. NVIDIA making cheaper and cheaper amazing GPUs and open source like kind of models is giving everyone the ability to have their own GPT-5 or 6 on their phone, in 5 years.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense that the AI tools that we see today can be incredible facilitators of a decentralized model.
Yep.
Like decentralized algorithms, essentially. And that centralized algorithms are dangerous whether they're AI models or not, right? Irrespective of being AI, we can go on a long list of ways that centralized algorithms have had adverse effects. As you pointed out, the paperclip problem exists outside of AI. It exists in social media today. It exists without deep learning. It exists with GMOs. It exists, we talked about seeds and the lack of diversity that what is that seed storage facility, where they collect all the
in
seeds.
Svalbard,
Yeah.
emergency, yeah.
Right. And they talk about the lack of diversity in the seeds that they're getting, right? And so we see that a centralized version of algorithms is dangerous because of the lack of diversity, and that's because we value scale over diversity.
Yeah,
and we'll continue to do that. But what if you can have both? Maybe AI enables this concept of enabling diversity, and enabling decentralization at scale. And so then, it's really a whole new world. Now we're living in a world where there's many, many, many seeds that get created on the fly that are accounting for region, potential weather forecasting for the following year, et cetera, instead of 5 different types of corn grown all over the planet.
Yeah, and I think, the paperclip problem's really, kind of a seminal kind of thought experiment people talk about, for the perils of AI, in the future. But we're already kind of living in a slow motion version of the paperclip problem, because to me, I read the paperclip problem as an allegory about what can go wrong when you give a complex, capable system a single goal to optimize for.
Right.
In this case, it was paperclips, right? We've already done that with the economy, basically saying that like companies need to optimize for profit, right? And I think it's useful to know that like in the paperclip problem, malice on the part of the AI against humans is not a necessary condition for it to still destroy humanity in service of paperclips. It's just kind of doing the old mafia, hey, it's just business, it's not personal. I was told to make paperclips and here I am. You have iron in your body and I need it. And I think that's how
the
you
stock
get
market
to...
algorithm is so basic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and, we call them in economics, you neatly call all those side effects externalities, right? Where as if they are external to what? External to the profit motive, right? But they're not really external. They're things that happen in health, public health, and environmental health. And I think that's kind of where we are with big food and industrial ag. Is that you gave them the charge to make profit, and they've reduced biodiversity, not because they hate plants, just because they just thought that the best way to do it is just to monocrop everything. It's more profitable.
We had a really interesting conversation recently with Gardner, and remind me of his name, Josh.
It was Don Scheibenreich.
Don Scheibenreich. They just wrote a book. He just wrote a book talking about the future consumer being like a major chunk of the future buyer being robots, right? So this concept, like, hey guys, robots are increasingly becoming the consumer, and companies are going to have to start thinking about marketing to robots, which is a whole new way of thinking, right? Because they're going to start buying stuff for people without people driving it. They may surface like a human in the loop kind of component, like confirm or moderate, but it's basically going to say, hey, for a lot of those buying tasks that we consider chores, it could start helping us make those decisions and kind of take that off our plate. So in a world where robots are going to start to become consumers and maybe making food choices for us, right? Including other things, there's an interesting idea about how it will make those choices and whether we will trust that algorithm. So we're not going to trust the algorithm that that the company that built our printer provides us to buy ink, because we know it's not going to choose the cheapest ink for us. And in that analogy, we realize then there's going to be some reputation component, probably an amalgamation of reputation component that agent's going to use to make a decision or help recommend a decision. So there's a recommendation engine it's going to be built on that says, hey, where I'm going with this is, that means like one day most of us could buy our ink from company A, and the next day we might buy our ink from company B, right? And it could happen instantaneously. And so company A will go from, making, taking 1 million orders a day to taking like 1,000 orders a day overnight.
Yeah.
And then I'm mapping that back to the stock market and saying, okay, do those metrics now in that world profit and now, because in the stock market, you're trying to price for future growth, right? For a future state in terms of financial health. But now you don't know, like it becomes very unpredictable. We're used to companies gradually, their products becoming less popular, having, leading indicators of slowly, fewer and fewer consumers. But now we'd be living in this world where one day you're hot, the next day you're gone, and your sales are down. So those same metrics, just because you're profitable today could mean you're out of business tomorrow. So now we're going to need better, more sophisticated metrics around how likely your product is going to remain highly rated versus, so then we get into the things like really how good are you as a company to adapt? How likely are you to stay relevant? And those old, overly simplistic metrics won't work. And so we're going to have to find new ones. That was a long way of saying, shit's going to change.
But I think that idea that robots are buying most of the stuff for us on behalf of us is already here. I mean, the whole entire industry of search engine optimization is trying to cater to the robot. Trying to, optimize your social media posts is catering to the robot. So it's already here. And there's probably a whole litany of companies that their main sales channel is Instagram.
Right.
And if they decide to change the algorithm, whoops, you just lost 20% of your sales one day. So I think that's already here.
Yeah, I
think
you're right.
With you.
Yeah, especially if you consider, businesses, so the whole, businesses sourcing, like a car manufacturer and, their whole, vendor chain management and sourcing products, and that happening algorithmically, it's definitely here, right?
Well, but I think it's interesting though, like let's say, okay, like right now I search for something in Google and I get a bunch of paid search things that I didn't really control, right? And I might click on one of them, might not, but that was out of my control. If I start using like my own LLM to do shopping, does that even the playing field a little bit more? Like, I mean, is there really going to be a situation where someone can buy keywords in your LLM searches? I certainly hope not.
Yeah.
Right? Because now I kind of have, there's the Google first page of search results is 90% aligned to what I asked for. It's 10% unaligned, right? The ad portion. Whereas an LLM, I can make it 100% aligned to what I want, right? By helping me shop for something, give me the best recommendation for a guitar, right? And I don't have to deal with these ads, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and that would make it harder, right, for companies, because now companies can kind of target specific groups of users with ads. But if now the user is behind a bot wall of their own design that's been kind of calibrated by them to search for certain things, like the metrics change in terms of like how you break through, right?
But I think Google's current iteration of integrating their Bard into their search results is a really good maybe signal of what's to come. Meaning, if I Google for most highly rated guitars of 2023, currently I'm going to get organic search results, I'm getting paid search results, and I'm getting an AI generated kind of recommender right now. And for now, they're all very somewhat clearly like differentiated. And I kind of look at that first page of like, okay, well, I have choices to make. I can trust the robot, I can trust the paid ads, I can trust the organic search results, right? And so it might not be an or situation, it might be an and situation, where it's like that first page is like my like cabinet of advisors, and I understand where each advisor is coming from, and I can still choose who I want to listen to with regard to a shopping item. So, that could be kind of the more realistic version of the future. It's not or, it's and, all of these different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you might like want some organic discovery built in there as well too, because I feel like a lot of times, like if I go out looking like maybe for a specific guitar, the most rewarding outcome is when I find some type of guitar I didn't even know existed, or like an emerging need that I didn't realize I had.
Yeah, I think we have to all realize there's like different modes of shopping. Like when I know exactly what I want, I just need no BS. I need to get straight to the thing. Whereas like incidentally buying stuff in your Instagram feed feels more like foraging than it is like, like you're walking along the forest and, oh my God, I found a truffle, I'm going to buy that right now versus...
Yeah. Oh yeah, I do need air filters.
Versus on your own thinking like, I need a truffle. I go straight to, truffles.com or whatever and get it, right? So...
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've noticed that the kind of the conversational AI marketplace sometimes feels a bit like the supplement world, and that you kind of have a lot of these aggrandized claims, and you can kind of invent proprietary ingredients, and you don't necessarily have to back things up or prove things. Are there cautionary tales from that world that you see kind of folding into like tumbling into what's going on now?
I think it's not even just from food and tech. I think any sufficiently large market is always going to have a high percentage of charlatans, right? I mean, I've done a lot of personal work on kind of image generation, and I stumbled upon a site, which I won't mention, but they're selling prompts. And I bought a few just because I'm just super curious. And like for $3.99, I can buy a prompt that gives me a Van Gogh style of painting of a whatever, right? Or I can buy an LLM prompt that says like, here's this like intricately structured prompt to create a business plan off of any idea I put into the thing. And it's just words, right? I mean, it's not terribly, maybe for someone who's just getting into this and has no idea how to do anything, that could be interesting to them. But, I just, how long is that business model going to really be relevant, right? Of me paying $4 for literally a sentence that says, give me blank in the style of Van Gogh, Renaissance, best quality, like, that definitely feels like the people selling like trucker pills, at the right now. It's just kind of like, it's kind of weird, shady. It's really capitalizing off people that, are just kind of not really being that careful about their shopping choices. So yeah, I think, but, in food, I think like, ideally you build up a tolerance and you build up your own kind of immunity to, sniff out of something as snake oil.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, or people aren't falling. Well, maybe they are falling for weight loss. They're just getting more. I mean, weight loss pills of the 80s, right? People would say, take this pill, like, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, amphetamines, really. Ozempic is maybe just a more evolved version of that. I think there's lots of examples of that in tech as well, too.
I can't help but like think that to oversimplify this feels like a, supply chain management for yourself. Like supply ERP system for your life.
Yep.
And that we can see ERP systems, we can see supply chain management, and how important that is to automate, how much of that is already automated. To your point, like when you said we're already there, I'm like, yeah, it's called ERP systems, right? And now what we're talking about with AI is it being feasible for every one of us to have our own ERP system, right? It's a complicated, complex ERP system that understands us and can make decisions. And it does make sense that we would have this. It does make sense that they'll make decisions and that they'll need tools to make decisions on our behalf. And those decisions will have ramifications, and trust will be a huge part of who's going to write those. Like, you would never give your supplier access to your ERP decision-making.
Yeah. Well, and so, I mean, I think the double-edged sword is going to swing really big with the future of kind of generative AI because, part of the benefit in food, especially of saying like, hey, be skeptical of what big food's trying to sell you, do your own research. The infamous last words, do your own research, goes both ways. You get a lot of people that very reasonable, they can reinforce the reasonable skepticism to craft themselves a more healthy diet. Do your own research for some people also leads to swallowing bleach and eating a flashlight to get rid of your COVID, right?
Right.
So I think like, that's sort of the analogy in right now where most of the people are just kind of using whatever OpenAI is giving us. Pretty soon it's going to be not do your own research, but like you should train your own model. Hey, train your own model,
Yeah.
We're gonna get the whole spectrum of train your own model fanatics, from the bleach eaters to the healthy eaters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like we're gonna tolerate our own mistakes, which essentially are the mistakes of the model we trained, more than we're gonna tolerate the mistakes of the model somebody else made. And that's just inherent in us to kind of live with our own. At least we have that sense of control. We feel much better.
Well, and I think that's why the alignment problem, I do think, is a red herring, because it's like aligned to what? What's aligned to one person is totally unaligned to another person, right? And so it's well,
something about the idea of like people buying up prompts too, like something that seems as basic as prompts, makes me think that, while it will be possible for people to have their own sort of LLMs or like a better version that involves more context, a lot of people probably won't know where to begin. They won't want to do it themselves. They'll need a lot of help. And so then you do end up with maybe preferred vendors. And that, again, seems like a big reputation thing. And if I think of the food world, in some ways that almost feels like a restaurant, right? It's like you go into a restaurant because you feel a connection maybe with what they're presenting on the outside. You know that they're using ingredients that have been screened for safety. And you might have a sense of like what's in season and what you might find there, but you also kind of like not knowing exactly what you're going to get. Maybe if there's an open kitchen, you feel like you can trust it a little more. So it's like regulated, but it's also, I don't know, like there's maybe a cool factor to it. There's all these different things that could be at play affecting your desire to affiliate or use that product.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe just the prompts that I bought as just a, N of 2 sample set were just super basic, and maybe there is something there, because you're right. I think generative models are sufficiently complex that there is a combination of words that are going to get you a really unique result over and over again. We just don't know what they are, right? Because there's just trillions of permutations of that. It just, the first thing I thought when I looked at the prompt marketplace, I was like, this is like those books that sell you like pickup lines.
Yeah.
It's like, there is a secret combination. There is a combination of words that will get someone to give you their phone number.
Yeah,
just
no matter what you look like.
There's a combination of words that's going to get the image or the essay that I want out of Midjourney or ChatGPT. I just don't know what they are, or I don't have the time to sit there to try to methodically figure it out, right? And so I could see a universe where I think there's a sufficiently complex and useful with good results kind of prompt that I could see somebody paying money for, But yeah, I just don't know what the repeat business is of that. Like once like a one pickup line works all the time, like can't you just like copy paste it and just tell everyone
exactly.
Like a prompt? Like
yeah.
So I mean that's where the analogy breaks down, because it's like you've got a lot of variables going on with pickup lines. The person you're giving them to and the pickup line is going to work differently. Whereas Midjourney or your ChatGPT's current model is relatively consistent.
Yeah, it does bring up a whole other episode, which is like copywriting prompt engineered.
Yeah,
that's like a and the whole like how much do you have to change something before, like could you copyright your prompt? Theoretically,
I think if I was a third-year law student and I was going to paperclip optimize myself to pick a specific law area to choose, I would probably, if I'm only optimizing for let's how can I make the most money possible as a lawyer in the next 20 years, I'd definitely go into some combination of like, copyright, AI law, because I just think that is the Wild West, and a lot of copywriters are going to buy a lot of boats off of the questions like this over the next 2 decades, 3 decades.
Right. Yeah.
When we were talking before about like the idea of putting a nutritional label, which is something you've written about, putting a nutritional label on something like an LLM, there's a lot of information you can present, but like a nutritional label on food requires a certain level of science, right, to be able to kind of truly understand the component ingredients and their parts. But with like an LLM, some of that stuff's a lot more murky, right? Like you don't necessarily know like where all that came from, and like what do you need to represent to people in order for them to feel safe?
I think the idea of a nutrition label is important for both, but I think they mean different things when you're talking about food versus generative models. For food, it's really straightforward. I want to know what I'm eating, what I'm putting in my body, where it came from, and safety and all that, right? For LLMs, yes, there is a component of like, I want to know what my language model ingested to make it talk the way it does. However, it gets really murky though, because we currently still don't understand how you get from point A to point B. Like if a LLM happens to suck up, the entire text of Mein Kampf, does it make it an anti-Semitic LLM? I don't know. I don't know. It's probably dependent more on like what are the guardrails around it, and if you're asking it to be anti-Semitic, right? Like it could have read it for research purposes, and if I'm going to ask it a question about chess, the fact that it read some hate speech may not matter, right? So that's where I think it gets murky. Is like, okay, great, I know all the stuff it read, but how does that actually correlate? How did that impact what came out of it? I don't really know.
And in terms
yet.
of like copyright law too, that's pretty thorny, right?
And
if I have a blog writing like Fight Club fan fiction, that I'm somehow like monetizing, then do I owe a part of that to is it Chuck Palahniuk? What? Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that's super useful, but I think that the nutrition label for LLMs is valuable, because one of the things that's been really useful in image generation and trying to get better images is pulling the metadata off of existing images and going on to places. And because it's a really useful learning tool to say like, oh, okay, I love that style. I'm gonna get the image metadata of the prompt and the negative prompt and the model and the CFG number and all that stuff, and I'm just gonna like adapt it to my needs. That's really a force multiplier for learning how to really develop images. Could that be a force multiplier for people trying to train their own LLMs? Like, if I had all the weights of the current ChatGPT, that'd be super useful to influence my own model that I want to train, right? So I think that's kind of an alternative value proposition for maybe having these nutrition labels for LLMs, is to accelerate innovation.
Right. Yeah, and people talk about, the idea that you could artificially generate data for LLMs, and I know there's research that suggests that it kind of breaks down the model, but I think that's, again, it depends, right? I don't think we're going to find out that it's just artificial text breaks down the model. I think we're going to, in certain circumstances it does, in certain circumstances it doesn't, but there's a way to look at this to say, once we've created the LLM that's sophisticated, a base level LLM could now help us sort through the data we're ingesting so that we don't ingest hate speech, right? Because you do, I think people underestimate how much we could analyze the underlying data that's going into the system. I think, it costs a lot more to like look at the data before it's going in, but at the same time, if there's a marketplace for that data, instead of it just being like data you scrape for free, but if companies like Reddit start selling this, then they'll start to have a responsibility to making sure, and an incentive to ensure that they kind of clean that data up, and maybe that actually creates a more economic model that makes sense to like, do more filtering on the data before it goes into the LLM.
Well, I think also the whole like, okay, the whole thing about like if you put hate speech in, hate speech is going to come out, you're going to create a biased LLM. I wonder if that's always going to be true, because I think about could you get an LLM where it read no hate speech? Could you get it to create hate speech?
Technically,
right?
I mean, mathematically, yes. Could you do it predictably? Like it, no, but mathematically, like why not? Once you get into those like long tail,
Sure, yeah.
Who knows? With temperature set low enough, absolutely, right?
I think about
there's also the idea of like you know that Mein Kampf exists in the world. You know that your LLM might somehow come into contact with it at some point. So maybe it's almost like parenting. Like maybe I want to show it this now and explain to it why this is flawed thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like plenty of humans who prosecute against hate speech have to read a lot of hate speech. Do they become hateful people? No, they're doing it for a different purpose. Their intent is to eliminate hate speech, and therefore they have to learn about it, right? But I think a lot about like AlphaGo when it made that wild game 2 move 37 against Lee Sedol when it played Go, and it was a move that like completely flabbergasted everyone. It showed itself up in chess thing too. So, I mean, I think like Gary Kasparov was saying, like AlphaZero when it was playing chess plays like an alien. These are not moves that any human really endorses, and that to me is a perfect evidence of Deep Blue just sucked up a lot of old games, right? And so you could argue that Deep Blue just basically brute forced a library of human play, and it's an avatar for every human grandmaster that ever lived. Whereas AlphaGo, AlphaZero weren't that. They found their own way to play, right? And so to me, it's like you didn't give it any Go data or chess data, yet it created what is arguably the best move possible. Does that analogy hold for like, I didn't give you any data about copyright law. Can you now like infer your way to become a copyright lawyer as an LLM? Like that to me is just mind boggling. And I think that's one of the most exciting, outstanding questions about just generative AI in general.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea that Go move, right? Because it is so famous, and the idea that, let's say it's the system's objective to reduce hate speech in the world. Like, let's say it figured out that with a certain persona or a certain type of person that's maybe on the fence, that is prone to hate speech occasionally, right? That being hateful and racist actually polarizes them in the other direction, right? Like maybe the move is like, I'm going to be so extreme that's going to polarize them to being less hateful, right? And so now you got a machine that's delivering hate speech with the intention to polarize the person it's interacting with to being less hateful, and we'd all interpret that as it's encouraging them, and it's just smarter than we are.
Yeah,
at how to pull that off.
I mean, again, it comes back to the alignment thing. I think like a lot of this, is AI going to spew out hate speech is more dependent pre-AGI on the person rather than the model, right? I mean, if you took the regulators off of ChatGPT, I'm sure it's capable of generating hate speech if you ask it to, and pre-AGI, we don't yet have a AI who is sentient and going to make its own decisions. So really, who's to blame for the hate speech, the model or the person who asked it to do it? I think it's the person for now.
Yeah. So it kind of brings up a whole nother area, which is understanding, and I think you touched on this earlier, understanding the objective. What is its objective, right?
Yeah.
And then being able to measure whether it's meeting its objective or not. That becomes really, really critical, because we may not be able to understand or presume to understand its method, right? As in Go, we can't judge its moves and make assumptions that that's going to lead to the outcomes, because our prediction machine is no longer as good as its, right? So now we have to almost solely look at the outcomes and then trust that if the outcomes are right, it's not question its methodology, which is like a really crazy idea,
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. The alignment issue becomes interesting too. we had a conversation with Jonathan Frankel, who's chief scientist at Mosaic ML, and he likened kind of tuning LLMs a little bit to like baking and mixology. And when they're working with clients who are wanting to create their own LLMs, the answer is often like bake like 1,000 mini cupcakes and find the one that you like. So it's interesting because if we're talking about a world where lots and lots of people have their own sort of LLM or bot working on their behalf, then the alignment thing becomes more and more personal, and you have people becoming their own mixologists, and depending on how open these tools are, they're cracking them open and deciding where they want the weights. And I guess, in human terms, that becomes problematic if they start wanting
in
dangerous
theory,
things.
if we jump 25 years from now and everyone's got a perfectly trained LLM that suits themselves, there is no such thing as an alignment problem because the AI is perfectly aligned to you.
Right.
The only alignment problem is if I want to talk about hate speech and you don't,
Yep.
It's like the same alignment problem that already exists. Like
you
people not being aligned with other people.
Removing responsibility of alignment from the centralized to the decentralized, like to the individual, has huge ramifications to that as a problem, because trying to align to the general population is a much harder problem than, as you're pointing out, aligning to you.
Correct. I do think, though, the problem in current day that is probably more serious is the okay, if I'm just creating hate speech on my own model, I'm an N of one, I'm the only person reading that, it's not really that harmful to society. If I can use an LLM to hijack tools of amplification, that's a different story, right? So, like, could you have an generative AI create enough web page links to manipulate the Google search algorithm so that my like hate blog is the first hit on Google organically?
Right.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, and I could see, I haven't heard of evidence of that actually happening, but in theory, I don't see why it couldn't. Like, here's a bank account of like 6 Bitcoin, create like 100,000 Squarespace websites that just have my like manifesto on them, and boom, it's going to be number one on Google unless someone steps in to do it, right? So I think that's a problem. I think there was a TED Talk with the deepfake guy that did the Tom Cruise deepfake, and that technology is utterly stunning and shocking and just bananas. It's, if you haven't seen it, check it out.
It's nuts.
It's frightening, right?
Yeah.
It's frightening. I think like this election cycle is going to be interesting for a lot of reasons, not for the least of this is the first where we have very sophisticated AI and deepfake tools, and I'm just kind of
I think
slightly
there've already been
tense.
campaign ads that have generative imagery, right?
Sure.
I'm not positive
Yeah.
on
I mean,
that,
I
but
don't
think
see why
so,
not. Yeah. Imagery. I mean,
Yeah.
imagery. We've nailed. Imagery has gotten. It's gotten so much better, even in the last 9 months. I mean, I remember I was going through our old hard drive and I found some images of like my first couple like Dolly like prompts, and they're just so they look so ridiculous compared to like what you can do off of the latest like Stable Diffusion. That's not even a year's time.
Nuts. And then that shows how rapidly like this is going to change, and if we add reputation to it, it kind of shows like what is a company can be hot, and then the next week someone will surpass it and everyone will know instantly. So we don't have this slow like word of mouth thing going on. We'll have this like almost instant shift, and that kind of just gets back to like one of the maybe the core underlying solutions, or at least contributors to a solution, is really addressing the reputation. We know as human beings that our reputation matters, and a lot of the things that prevent like a coffee shop or a local restaurant from doing anything too short term is that human beings' reputation, the reputation of the people who work there, and the reputation of the business as a whole. If you allow agents, digital agents out in the world, they don't care about their reputation. They have no reputation to care about, and so maybe this problem isn't as much of a AI problem as a problem with the social media platforms, with Google's algorithm, that they don't go far enough to assigning reputation to an individual or with some entity that has something to lose, because their blunt algorithm is based on how many users they have, and they're not incentivized to say whether they're real users or not. And Google doesn't really care about, whether the website that it surfaces is necessarily the best for society. It cares more about, keywords and advertising and, the revenue for the search engine. And that's what possibly has to change, is that we have to trust these sources of reputation, and they have to be more accountable to a better reputation-like system that would look more like a credit score. Not that that's like the best example, but what we know is they are highly accountable to fraud. It would be much harder to create a fake person with a fake credit score. It would be much harder to game your credit score, and there would be consequences to those companies if they let that happen, a lot greater than the consequences we see with, Twitter for having bots on, or Facebook for having bots on. If there were fake people in our credit facilities, companies that, these companies like Experian or whatever, they wouldn't have a business. And so
I think
we know
Google
it's possible.
I think Google still currently, or wherever the Google is in the next generation, still plays a really big role in doing this, because that, that analogy, that hypothetical I made up about create 100,000 Squarespace websites with some horrible manifesto on it.
And there were
Google should be able to account for that and discount that, right? I mean,
they should know the author, right? They should be like, maybe that's what they're missing, is like, I don't know who created this, but I'm putting it here anyway, right? Same as social media. I don't know who authored this post. I don't care. As long as people like it, I'm going to post it.
Well, and because Google still has incentive to be respectable, right? I mean, there hasn't been like an Elon type person to take over Google and just say it's whatever. They're still incentivized to kind of be, and for better for worse, Google represents the objective truth for many people. What's the first thing you do when you hear about a suspicious fact? You Google it, and it's not to say you just trust the first thing, but you can kind of, I think we've all built up our own kind of sniff test to say, like, I'm going to Google a dubious fact, and I can just tell from the first page, is it true or not? Like if there's like 90% of the links are debunking it, then it's probably false, But so I think that's as an institution of truth, for better or for worse, it is objective. It does represent the objective truth for a lot of people right now.
Well, that's a soft skill too that is changing, right? The nature of it, being able to kind of the sniff test on technology is becoming a lot harder to smell.
My daughter's 3, and I think her sniff test detector has to be so much more sophisticated. Is going to be so much more sophisticated than mine.
One thing
I feel like mine's updated all the time.
It is.
My kids tell me.
One thing we talked about earlier was the idea that with an LLM, we put the responsibility on the system for being accurate. And at Google search and in Google, they have this like advantage of shifting the responsibility to the end user for doing the sniff test. And that's almost just a product of the anthropomorphic nature of LLMs, right? Is like, hey, you're acting like a person, so I'm going to shift responsibility to... In other words, if you Googled something and found a site with hate speech, are you going to blame Google for it showing up in search results? Or, to the degree that you would blame OpenAI if it delivered results with hate speech, right? And the answer is, for most people, it seems like very squarely going to blame OpenAI and put the responsibility on them, whereas, Google kind of effectively like moves the responsibility, or at least perceived responsibility, to the end user to say, well, I searched this, I had agency, and therefore the results are a result of what I did, and that I got multiple results, and I chose the one with hate speech. Like it just moves agency, right?
This is an area that I think is so fascinating that I haven't fully unpacked yet. So a lot of this might just be like open-ended, out loud thinking. But in my world, in food and nutrition, a lot of little think pieces have been written from nutritionists that kind of say, everyone's talking about ChatGPT. So I tested it out, trying to ask it nutrition advice and, blah, 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 right? And then more often than not, they just kind of declare in some headline on LinkedIn that says, ChatGPT is not the future of nutrition. It got all these things wrong about this, and this thing about carbs is a myth, and yada, yada, yada. I can't really pinpoint why. I think I generally know, but I haven't put it into words yet. But that critique bothers me a lot because for just so many reasons, I think, because I think you're right. You're right. That's the evidence of what you said of they anthropomorphize ChatGPT as basically a bad nutritionist.
Right.
And so that's ChatGPT is not a good nutritionist. But I was like, okay, well, you're kind of missing the point because it never claimed to be, but also that stuff's also in the internet, right? So but you're right, because if you funnel all that stuff to one point of accountability, it's very easy to say that ChatGPT is a bad nutritionist, right? On the one hand, it's representing just everything that's been said. So you're not really blaming ChatGPT. You're just representing bad nutrition advice in general. On the other hand, it's also I would never ask my 3-year-old for nutrition advice. And if she gives me you should just eat Skittles for dinner, I'm not going to call her a bad nutritionist. She's learning,
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with ChatGPT and all these things. It's writing them off because they can't do something right now is kind of foolish, because it's like saying a 3rd grader doesn't know how to do brain surgery. Why would you say that? It's not the right critique, I guess,
Well, the interface too, right? Like a chat window, you ask it a question, it just gives you an answer. Google gives you a list. So I think you just perceive the information differently too.
Well, the fact that it types it out letter by letter is a UI nuance that I think should not be overlooked as being very shrewdly, it personifies it. I feel like I'm chatting. It could totally wait 10 seconds and just flash the whole thing up there.
Yes.
But it doesn't. So, so I don't know. It's just, I always had trouble with those critiques.
Yeah.
Not that I'm in support of bad advice or bad information. I just think it's not a very precise or helpful critique.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a reflection of the information that's out there, right? Because nutrition in particular is a very murky subject to go poking around.
Yeah, it's a normalization of what's broadly out there. And if that's what you're looking for, then that's where you should go to get that. If you're not looking for that, you shouldn't, like you said, it's not a nutritionist. It's a source of what is common knowledge, right? It's a source of common knowledge. It's not a source of the latest, coolest knowledge on nutrition. It's outdated already, just on sort of when 2021, and then it's normalized because it's not looking at edge cases. It's not looking at the latest study from the medical journal that just came out. It's mashing them all together and just giving you sort of the common advice that is known out in the world. And so if that's what you want to know, then that's what you got. And that's what's out there. And should we all do what's common knowledge? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but at least know that. I think when you look at how Siri and Alexa and these tools handle it, it's sourcing, right? It's sourcing the knowledge and saying on the website, nutrition.com, it says blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it attaches to reputation in that way. And that gives us, a little bit more faith. I guess when you don't source it anthropomorphically, what we do is then we attach source to the mouth of where it comes out of, right?
Yeah.
And so if I were to say to you that, bananas are bad for you, you would source me. But if I said I read on blah, 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 that banana, then you would account the source, right, that I gave. And so I guess to your point, by typing it out, acting like it's thinking about it, and then giving you its answer, and it not coming from a particular source, we're relying on the reputation or building a reputation for that LLM. And then as such, we're constructing like, okay, what can we trust the LLM for and not? And everyone's, creating this matrix of you can trust it for this, but not for that, and for this and not for that.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think this is clearly another example of where we clearly as a society just have to get better at prompt engineering, each of us, because I think like it's I think the nutritionist writing off ChatGPT as a bad nutritionist is an artifact of people being very used to saying like, oh, Dr. Oz is a quack, so I'm going to write him off, right? But the truth of the matter is the LLM's not Dr. Oz. It can be Dr. Oz if you want it. It could also be Dr. Phil. It could also be like the doctor from The Simpsons, right?
Yeah.
Like it can be all of those things. And I think we're still at a phase where I think it's, we just maybe aren't asking it the right question for the answer that we want,
Yeah. And
Yeah,
also
well-
we're generalizing. We're saying, I asked it this, it gave me a wrong answer. Really, the anthropomorphic nature is it's not an it. It's a series of its. It's many machines. It's many models, and each interaction is fairly unique. And so one time I did this and it gave me this is a more precise way of saying it, not to say it's bad at all things. It's like one time I said this and it said that. The next person could write the same exact thing and it could be absolutely spot on. And you can ask it one thing and it be off, and then another thing and it be on. And so really we shouldn't be thinking of it in general terms. We should be thinking about very specific interactions, just like we would with Google. I did a Google search yesterday and this came up, but we know in a month I could do the same search and something else will come up. And you don't say Google's a bad nutritionist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think those are kind of just issues of just optimizing the information retrieval. Like, I think with LLM specifically, I think there's like kind of like two things that you can look to it for. You can look at it for information retrieval, right? Which is essentially just souped up Google, find me these facts here and bring them to me in a really easy to parse way. Or you can ask it to be a more creative insights basically synthesize new knowledge out of data, right? Which is what humans do. We read a bunch of stuff and then we come up with our own ideas. And so that to me, again, is interesting, is like, how, when you can upload all of PubMed into ChatGPT and then give it a little bit of the, move 37 go magic, and, could you get an AI to develop a new treatment for cancer if it read every research paper out there? Like, that to me is super exciting, if that's possible.
Yeah, in a prior conversation, we talked about this, and I think it's super relevant. You said it actually, which was that maybe we just need to think of the LLM as a way for machines to talk and be impressed that, wow, look, machines can talk, but not necessarily marry that with the fact that LLMs can have ideas, generate ideas on its own, or even be a resource for knowledge, a sole resource for knowledge, but just saying the resource for knowledge lays behind it. And it's just an interface to that knowledge. And all it is just a UI. It's just a way to get machines to talk. And it's confusing us with the fact that it occasionally gets things right on its own.
Yeah. I mean, the way I kind of look at LLMs right now is that it's like hiring an undergraduate student out of college to work at your company, right? Like, let's say you work at a stock trading company, your investment bank or something like that, right? You don't hire an undergrad per se because they know every single piece of data about every company that's investable. You hire them because they have core skills in speaking, reasoning, mathematics.
Right, they can read and write, yeah.
and logic, right? But then you learn on the job, you fill that undergrad's brain with domain-specific knowledge, you say, okay, welcome to the team. Here's our proprietary training algorithm. I want you to learn this, and
Right.
you're getting it because you can learn fast. I think that's what kind of the base model of ChatGPT is right now, and that's the analogy that is for everyone having their own LLM is like, okay, everyone's going to have our own undergrad student trailing us, and we're going to fill it with a Google Drive full of additional documents that relate to my world.
Right.
And that's going to become a grad student in my domain, you know?
Yeah, I'm going to fill it with nutritional data that it's going to use.
Totally.
But I'm not going to rely on the LLM itself to surface that. I'm going to feed it the specific data, that the ideas, and then it's going to manipulate those ideas and regurgitate them in a way that is easy to understand and consume for a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 25-year-old, a non-nutritionist, an expert nutritionist.
Yeah.
And so we're just looking at ways to recommunicate, to regurgitate those ideas. So we're just looking at a highly customizable UI that's hyper personalized for the reader and not necessarily the source of the ideas themselves.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you go back to the nutritionist writing off ChatGPT as a bad nutritionist, well, if they knew how to download a base model and then add all of their papers that they've ever published as a nutritionist into it, that person in theory would never think ChatGPT is bad, because that'd be akin to saying they're bad.
They're going to say that. They're like, it's like, genius.
and that's the double-edged sword, is that like you're just creating your own hype man or woman.
Right.
Dr. Oz can do the same thing. So like,
that's an interesting thought. Is like you endeavor to create your own, like in essence, it's kind of a digital twin that you're building. The more and more you're conditioning it to do things that you like. Maybe it's not a twin of you like the way an identical twin would be, but it is kind of like this digital representation of yourself. And is it worth not just filling it with good things? Like, should you?
And is
tell
this
it
a
some of the
great
things that you're
mirror?
bad at?
Is this a great mirror for us? The more we design ourselves, the more we existentially look at ourselves,
and can we handle that?
I think this idea is imminent in the mainstream, because I already did it. Like, I'm not a coder, but I was already able to hack together a reasonable LLM that like I can drop as many documents as I want into a Google Drive folder that I specified, and it can spit that all back to me really well. It's days or hours. There's probably someone in a hacker house working on this right now to make a mass appeal like a very simple user interface to do this. I would not be surprised if by the end of this year, or even by the time this podcast drops, someone has said like, hey, blah blah blah.com, give us your credit card and then click here and then point to all the files you want in this thing, and now we are your personal LLM. Like, that is such an obvious idea to anyone who's read anything about AI that I think like that idea is definitely going to happen very soon.
Yeah.
Like, speaking of ideas, like the AI quote unquote space is very broad, as is kind of the food space. Are there, out in the food world, are there examples of this technology being used that you're finding particularly inspiring or interesting or maybe frightening in other ways?
Not yet, because I don't think anyone's really taken the time to double down on training it, because I think food, to be good at kind of food is so specific, I think. And I think it does require someone taking down GPT-3 and piling it on with some database of every cookbook ever written. To be, either the New York Times ran this article, I think a year ago, right after GPT went out. They tried to make a Thanksgiving dinner based off of GPT's suggestions, and it just came out hilariously bad, right? And I could have seen that coming, I guess, but it was really interesting and entertaining to read about how it happened. I think there's a few big barriers, right? Because I think, look, if I want to create an LLM that is a really great cooking recipe retrieval machine that could maybe infer, I think that's relatively simple-ish to do, like, because you just have to find that database of those cookbooks and put it in there, and ideally it can make sense out of that, right? I think that's interesting. To create new, like, I don't know if the Go Move 37 exists for food, because think about how AlphaGo arrived at move 37. It played Go by itself billions of times, right? And it had a really fast learning loop of what works and what doesn't work in Go. You can't do that with cooking yet, because what are you going to do? Cook a billion meatloafs to find the best one?
Yeah.
So I don't care how fast a computer can compute all the permutations of how to make a meatloaf. You still need someone to actually make the damn thing and taste it and give you feedback, positive feedback, to minimize the loss function of meatloaf.
Right.
And so there's so what do you do then? You'd have to encode the entire like taste sensory mechanism of humans' brain. You'd have to model that digitally in order for it to have an AlphaGo experience where it can literally in virtual space make a billion meatloafs. I'm not saying that's impossible. That just feels very far off, you know? And
what about in like agriculture or something, like in that space where maybe they could, I mean, I guess agricultural knowledge is still evolving and has been for hundreds of years, but is there maybe a missing piece that might exist out there in terms of like rethinking our relationship to growing food?
I think that's one of the areas where I think it's probably most advanced, you know. I mean, I think from indoor farming to applying sensors and just data collection on regular farms, there's been a handful of people that have already been working on that, trying to get really good learning loops in to predict, you know, what area, okay, I see this interesting fungus that I've never seen before. What do I do? Farmers Business Network, which is a industry group for farmers, they created a pilot called Norm. It's basically NORM, like the guy from Cheers, but it's called Norm, and it's basically they basically took a model, a base language model, and they piled in a bunch of agronomy data into it. And so it's a pilot, and it's heavily caveated by them, saying like, you know, this is just an experiment. But the use case, presumably, is that a farmer can pull out his or her smartphone in the field and be like, I see this interesting fungus I've never seen. What do I do? Right. Yeah. So, I think in the realm of ag tech, they feel like they're more advanced than like culinary with respect to using AI for.
Yeah, we released a project. We've been working on it for years. Major company. I can't say, but same idea. Take a picture of the leaf. That photo will. And what's interesting about the model was, it's kind of to your earlier point of, you know, do we get machines that can taste, or do people become nodes in an IoT kind of environment where the machine delegates that, but the humans become sensors, right? So the humans taste for the machine. They become sensors versus the driver or the coordinator of the project, right? In our case, it's WhatsApp, and the farmers don't go online except WhatsApp, and social media, and that's what causes them to decide, like, should we spray, should we not spray, for this disease, because my neighbors are spraying, you know, blah blah blah, and that's where the project began, and now it's evolving into far more than that. But what those farmers have become are nodes in kind of an IoT system that allow a farmer to check the area, his area, for, like, let's say, hey, this leaf, I'm going to upload it. It says, you know, because it's a, you know, can it always say it has this disease or that disease just from a photo?
Yeah.
No. But it can confirm with other farmers and say, you know, it looks like this disease, and there have been reports of this disease in your area, therefore you should spray. And that's really important to this company, because even though you would think they'd want more spraying because they make money, that's actually not true. If you spray too much, then the farmer can't sell their crop. And so they really are trying to be careful and mindful of the customer itself, not overspraying. And that's actually where the project began. But yeah, this idea of humans as part of a network or an IoT, like as a sensor, because we're quite good sensors, right? To your point, sophisticated in taste, and our senses are quite sophisticated. We make great sensors.
Well, I think, I mean, the ag tech stuff, I totally agree. Use cases like you just talked about, I think are really, really exciting. And I think there's some real insight there that I think is going to have some great effects out there. Taste, I think, is so hard. I think even if you could chemically model the taste receptors and how people react to them, it's not just the flavor of something that gives you an overall impression, it's context, right?
100%.
I mean, I know we have an old family friend who my parents are friends with, and he was a wealthy guy, and he was, he was in Vietnam in the war too, and he said, like, my favorite food ever was this Big Mac that I had at McDonald's, and he's a guy who's traveled the world, eaten everything delicious and fancy and whatever. Yet he said, like, the Big Mac was my favorite meal because after I got honorably discharged from the war, after being shot in the leg, I came home after a hellish journey and I had that Big Mac and I was just brought to tears by how wonderful it was. So, like, not only do you have to, like, encapsulate and digitize the physical things that are happening in your taste buds, how do you account for that?
Right. 100%.
Like, how do you account for that? I mean, there's tons of stuff that objectively a foodie would sneer at, but I think are great because there's some other thing going on, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
childhood memories, grandma's apple pie. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Context.
It's
at most, I could see potentially deep into the future a personal LLM that models my overall impression of food for me.
exactly.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But
It's
again,
knowing
there's
that grandma made apple pie and then going, you know what, you might like the apple cobbler, because it's going to remind you of grandma's apple pie. And that to somebody else, to your point, it may say the peach cobbler because it's going to remind your grandma made peach pie. So you're going to want the peach and you're going to want the apple.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that is where we're going,
like,
right?
I think it was Grant Achatz, the chef of Alinea in Chicago. I think it was him that said this, but he kind of called it the mom's pancakes problems, where he's saying, like, we are some of the most talented chefs on the planet. My team can cook just about anything, but I'm not going to try to make your mom's pancakes because I can deliver you a technically perfect pancake, right?
Yes.
By all measures, is technically perfect. But I'm never going to be able to compete with your objectively imperfect mom's pancakes.
Oh my God, I feel like that's like the biggest, like, newbie mistake if you have no experience in cooking. I a long time ago had a restaurant, and my partner, came in with all of his grandma's, like, famous recipes and thought, like, this is going to be a hit. Everyone's going to love these. We should put them on the menu. And I was like, oh my God, this has got to be like the number one mistake in food is thinking that your grandma's pancakes are going to be appreciated by other people the way you do.
Yeah. Well, I remember, like, years ago, before, like, all the scandals came out for Mario Batali, I went to I think it was his salami shop or something like that. Anyway, it was a shop in Seattle, which I don't know if it exists anymore, that made, like, homemade pasta. And I think Mario's actual grandmother was placed in the street side window making pasta. And so I just, like, remember standing in line being like, okay, wow, he's basically just pimping out his grandmother to say like, hey, you're all going to love my Nona's pasta. Like, look at Nona. She's literally here in the window. So I just thought that was such a weird thing. Like,
it is.
It is. You've kind of commoditized your grandmother in a very overt way.
Exactly. And this kind of brings up something I'd like to kind of circle back to your point. Like, a company's going to come out with, and, I bite my tongue because, we're going to be launching, we've been in private beta for a few years now, and we'll be launching within the next couple of months. So it's as if you knew that, which you didn't, for the record. But one of the interesting things about this project, as we've been doing it, behind the scenes, is there's this personal concept of an LLM, right? But we also realize that there's a place also for a group LLM. That this also applies to, like, it could be your family LLM, it could be your business LLM, and it's just more sophisticated but still narrow, right? It's this idea that that there is context within different groups. It could be your Dungeons and Dragons team LLM.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. I see where you're going with
Yeah.
this.
And so making room for not only is there an LLM for you personally, but that there's these group LLMs also that are contextualized for, trying to...
They know all the inside jokes, yeah.
Well, and also just trying to pick the food that 7 people will all like. Like, not just the food you will like, but hey, 7 people are coming over. I'm not going to make 7 different dishes for each person. Can you figure out for me what is the one thing I can make that all 7 people will appreciate? And I find that really interesting because it's like halfway between, right?
Two things I'll say about that. I mean, like, first off, you're right. I didn't know about that, but oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. I will love to be a beta tester if you need it. Like, I have so many different group chats with group friends that, like, if I could upload all of our inside jokes and just like our overall general tone, like, that'd be really just interesting to have like some LLM that's part of my inside group, like, contribute to the group.
Right.
And then the second thing is, I think, like, do you know how many marriages you could save by just having it upload a married couple's eating history and helping it decide what to have for dinner?
Yeah. It's either the, what restaurant, I don't know, what restaurant do you, I don't know, what do you feel like, and just be like, screw it, let's just...
Such a huge part of being in a relationship is just figuring out what to eat every night for dinner over and over again until you die.
It's like compromise bot, right? Like,
oh my gosh. So if you could, like, I mean, I see that's a unicorn right there on the marriage thing alone.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's a great idea. I mean, you're right. You're so right. That's such a great idea. It's like, yes, there's the individual one, and then there's the group one. I mean, I totally can envision in the future everyone's going to have their dashboard of different purpose LLMs, right? Because we're all multidimensional,
right?
It's like I believe in and subscribe to the good food movement of slow food and properly, well food. But like, I also have like certain junk foods that I absolutely like. And I think we're all multidimensional.
Right.
And you're right. I think we're each going to have like a quiver of arrows, and those arrows are LLMs for different situations.
Yeah. And maybe that rolls up to like what appears to be a single interface, like our LLM UI. Yeah. But behind the scenes, we're talking to many LLMs, and they're talking to each other, and trying to coordinate and normalize, and then feed it to us in an anthropomorphic way. Maybe that may be completely unnecessary too, but at least give us, one throat to choke, so to speak. In perception.
There was already. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the name of it, but I already did download like an app that actually it was like the kayak of like LLMs where you could have one query and you could farm it out to all this. So, there's probably opportunities for companies to get in on that without having to ever train anything. It seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So you get into, I have an LLM, but its only job is to go out to 10 other LLMs and then summarize the findings of those 10, so I don't have to read 10 answers. And you're like, oh boy, okay.
But if that world exists, right? If that world exists where I think there's so many LLMs that there's a market for people who have startups that aggregate LLMs, does that creates a different condition? Because you look at what all like airlines do with tricky pricing to show up higher in the Kayak or Expedia results, right?
Yep.
Like Spirit does all the add-ons because you get the base price higher in the list, and that's just kind of a bad outcome of that.
Yeah.
Like, is there an equivalent for that where LLMs are going to like juke their results to show up higher in the aggregator?
You could almost say that's the future, right? It's as people gamify trying to show up higher in natural search for Google, and we have LLMs to help us create keywords for our site to show up in Google, right? Like literally, we can now use LLMs to generate keywords so that we show up, and the context would be, where do you want to show up? And it's gonna write the text and help you do it. And to your point, does this all become a cat and mouse game as LLMs become the consumers? for half of the products we buy. And now this is just like a never ending, who's got more processing power than the next guy.
I already see this happening because, like I mentioned before, I spend way more time on image generation stuff than I do on LLM stuff with my personal kind of research. And there's a litany of websites right now that have all these different models that come from respected sources and unrespected sources. I think I mentioned in the previous chat we had about how I just went model downloading happy, and I downloaded one that hijacked my GPU and started mining Bitcoin or whatever somebody. So, there's already that dynamic in image generation, local image generation, where people are collecting all these models and refining the models, and I think that's both good and bad. I mean, there's some really stunning models on there that are way better than what stock Midjourney is creating for general purposes or specific purposes, but then there's also some really weird bad malware things out there too. Yeah. Could you generate content? I mean, the answer is yes, but I mean,
Effectively, could you generate content today, like you said, a ton of web pages, in hopes that the future LLM will pick them up in some sort of edge case that wouldn't get normalized from other data? So you're like, you've created your own like curl script or something, right? So your own little like language, right? That gets picked up by an LLM, and now you've like essentially seeded, your own little LLM inside of a large LLM because you said, using Klingon or whatever language you came up with.
Yeah. Well, and another one like critique that I kind of bristle at too is like people saying that like AI generated images are not art, and I think I really reject that, because it's not art in the same way as like painting and oil painting is art, but it's more like an Andy Warhol thing where he used silk screening to mass produce things that he didn't. I mean, there's masterpieces he's made that he probably would never laid a finger on. And I actually like recently got my first paid project where a small part of it is actually creating AI images, I'm not doing it behind the scenes without the client knowing, but we agreed that making images in a certain part of this project is going to be interesting and useful to show off. And I spent days trying to get one image perfectly. And it's not art in the sense of painting or sculpting, but it's certainly a different kind of, it's almost like electronic musicians that combine different synthesizers and settings to make interesting music. That is art, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the same as playing a violin. I think the whole exercise of staying up late over and over again, trying to get this image processor to develop the result that is going to be great is really hard work. And so I just don't think that I reject that kind of idea that like, AI generated images is not art. Because
there's also like this like Warholian, I don't know if that's a word, but kind of marbling to generative AI that I've noticed. Like sometimes if I'm screwing around with like generative, what have I been using? Stable Diffusion 2, I think, on Hugging Face. Like if I feed it really vague prompts, which I kind of like to do to see how odd it can be. But a lot of times it'll default to like an imagined product label. Like it wants to create commercially recognizable things in a way, it seems like.
Yeah.
I think every new technology of making something comes with things that are initially seen as mistakes or problems that end up being interesting for that medium, right? Like I think you're right. I think some of the chaos that comes out of these image generator things, while they're not maybe precise, they are interesting in their own right. And they're no different. They're absolutely no different than Jimi Hendrix using feedback out of his amp to create music.
So this brings me to like this interesting combining the two ideas of what we talked about before and now, which is imagine that you surfaced a whole selection of generated images that let's say you just get enough of them, right? I don't know what enough of them is, but I don't think anybody does, but you create enough of them, you put them on the internet in the style of of you, right? So we have these artists who have like said, take my stuff off, right? Because you can say, create an image in the style of blah, 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 right? The person. Yeah. So imagine you create your own style, essentially. You put it out there for the LLMs to pick up, and then they kind of generate the model. And now you go back and say, create an image in the style of you, of like your name, and all it's really doing is picking up all the images that you kind of seeded it. And now you have your own custom LLM, but inside of a generic. So Stable Diffusion is now like producing your specific style because you put it out on the internet. And you've created your own LLM without running it locally or training anything. Sort of interesting idea.
Well, I mean, this is already happening in image generation where, yes, people say, give me an image in the style of Van Gogh or whatever, but they're also saying like, oh, give me an image in the style of Midjourney. Give me an image in the style of Stable Diffusion 1.5. Give me an image, of Stable Diffusion 1.5 XL, And so that to me is just wild because like there's just the remixing is happening at such a, it blows my mind to think about how many different creative permutations are possible when you get models citing other models and then models citing those models that cited other models.
Right.
So this is where that whole attribution thing becomes very convoluted. Like if I put the entire work of Picasso into a model and then I reference it from another model and then add to it and then do it again and again and again, how much money do I owe the Picasso estate?
Right.
Yeah. There's also this idea too, like the artistic process isn't completed until someone looks at the work and internalizes it a bit. Like when I'm doing these like bad generative exercises, like Alf eating pasta continually produces such a horrific, weird image where like the pasta becomes the fur, like it can't seem untangled. But I have like a very visceral reaction to it. It feels like I'm looking at, like Francis Bacon or something. There's like that kind of like strange, unsettling feeling that I can't quite pinpoint. So there is that element of art in it, even though the artist might be, it's so fragmented, right?
We get so lost in who art belongs to. I mean, I always have this, I'm sure a lot of people do, where if I, chose a t-shirt or something and someone says, nice t-shirt, I don't say thank you because like I didn't make it, right? I'm like, yeah, it is kind of nice, because it's not. But then some people say thank you because it's their taste, and so they're taking credit for the art because they chose it out of all the universe of T-shirts out there. So they're like, oh, thank you, So who really did own it?
The most endless rabbit hole is the question, what is art, right? People had been debating this since people started doing cave drawings, right? And I just think there's never a good answer to it.
And who gets credit, because if you don't know what it is, then how do you give credit? And you say, well, does credit go to the person who grew the food or to the person who made the dish or for the restaurant that put it on the menu or the person who recommended you try it?
Well, it's notoriously difficult to make money making art. And I think that's a bigger problem too, is that now it's become conceivably harder to do that. And easier for people to kind of,
It's context, right? Just like taste, it's context, right? I mean, I think part of art is, most of the art market is not fueled by objective, like aesthetic scores or reactions. It's supply and demand, right? I mean, it's some painter made a limited edition of 10 of these things, and him or her is very famous and has all these other works that are worth millions of dollars. So guess what? That thing's going to be worth millions of dollars. It's the thing that, people go to like the MoMA and say, like in front of a Mondrian or like a Rothko, they say, well, I could do that. Well, yeah, but you didn't. Right. And you're not Mark Rothko,
Yeah.
And so, yes, you could do it, but would it be hanging in the MoMA? Absolutely not, because you're just copying, right? And so,
people say that about like a Picasso, but then they haven't looked at his early works. They don't realize that he he can do the realistic painting as well. Like that happened, and that somehow informed like this state.
Yeah.
And that
he's in
all
now.
loops back to that whole the value of a nutrition label to an LLM. All of these themes, I think, research there because you're really trying to it's one thing to label everything that a thing learned. It's another thing to attribute or financially credit it back to references. Like where's the I had a guitar teacher when I was like 12 years old. He was this super salty jazz cat before I knew what the word jazz cat really meant. But he would say to me yeah, if you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal from everyone, it's research.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like this whole concept of AI being a thing, it's really not. It's just something that's making us face the absurdity of so many things that have been there. And this idea that somebody accidentally put peanut butter and chocolate, and then somehow now they deserve to get all the money that is made from peanut butter and chocolate as a combination. Because they happen to be the one that accidentally did that, versus somebody who spent their whole life learning a skill and then happened to produce something because they put a lot of work into it. We're like, well, so if you work really, 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 really hard at accidentally mixing peanut butter and chocolate, you deserve all the money. But if you come across it by accident, why do you deserve all the money? And then who was the person who actually took it to market? Like it's absurd that we credit people with art, right? That we credit one person forever.
But it's also, I mean, if you take the guitar teacher's thing of like you steal from one person's plagiarism, you steal from many, it's research. A human brain can only hold so many influences together, but that's sufficient enough to say that, like, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan's work is Stevie Ray Vaughan's, not all of the hundreds of musicians he was influenced by, right? Okay, fine. LLMs basically enable us to steal from literally everything, right? And so, like, how do you attribute that? You've basically amplified the human brain to not only steal from one person, to steal from billions of things, right? So, you know, if you're going to prosecute OpenAI for stealing from all these different authors, then you're definitely going to have to prosecute a musician from stealing from all of their influences. And then I also think, like, with respect to IP and food, you're right. Like, you can't copyright a recipe. Like, you can copyright, the most you can do is trade secrets. And, you know, the Coke secret formula is not a copyright. It's a trade secret, and they go under great measures to protect it. Just like OpenAI's weights, you know, the weights of ChatGPT are no different fundamentally, I think, IP-wise, than the trade secret for Coke.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's really hard to attribute these things, and sometimes it's just about keeping it a secret, like the old days of art, ironically, you know, where...
And just hope there's not cocaine in the Coca-Cola formula.
Yes.
It used to be.
Yes. Yeah. It's,
well, I mean, I hate to leave this conversation.
No, we can go on and on. We've traveled all over.
But this might be as good a place as any, because I don't think there will be a good place. But we should definitely find a way to continue it sometime soon.
Absolutely. It was so great to chat with you guys.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Hey, thanks again for tuning in to Invisible Machines. Don't forget to follow Invisible Machines wherever you get your podcasts so that you can hear new episodes as soon as they drop. You can also watch this podcast on the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. Thank you so much to everyone who listens to this podcast, and especially to those of you who leave comments, because we've received a lot of really useful commentary that has helped us shape this podcast as we move forward with it. Thank you, as always, to our producers, Elias Parker, Kate Timchenko, and our video editor, Michael Litvinov, for making this podcast look and sound wonderful. We look forward to catching up with you again next week, right here on Invisible Machines.